The local pregnancy center here in this community of Falls Church has reported that their phones have been ringing off the hook from abortion-minded women who are changing their minds and are going to the local pregnancy center. So what you are doing is making a tremendous impact. As we stand here on the sidewalks and as we are here as a force of change in this community, I'm reminded of other great social reformers who have used the sidewalks and the streets, as Father Frank pointed out, as a place to bring about change. And of course, one that we all know very well is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And a few days ago, I was in Niagara Falls, New York with his niece, Alveda King. She'll be on a nationwide teleconference that Father Frank and I will be doing later tonight. I was talking with Alveda about the civil rights movement, and I was reflecting on a story that I had read in some of the autobiographical works of Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King. And one of the stories really impacted me because I think it speaks to us today and what we're doing. And it was a story about when Dr. King was returning in 1964 from a trip to Scandinavia, and he was coming back to the States and had an appointment at the White House with President Lyndon B. Johnson. And when he went to the White House, Dr. King immediately moved the conversation in the topic area that he wanted to discuss to talk about securing voting rights for African Americans. And here was the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the nation, and he looked Dr. King in the eye and he said, "That's impossible." He said, "The American public is not ready for that. Congress will never go for it, especially the Southern bloc of votes. I can't expend my political capital on something like that that has no chance of passage. You're just going to have to wait." But Dr. King, under his breath, quietly said to himself, "Well, we'll just have to see about that, won't we?" And as he described it, he left the mountaintop of the White House and went down into the valley of Selma, Alabama. And in Selma, as he described it, something happened down there. Because people who for years had had their rights trampled upon were finally willing to come out of their homes, they were willing to come out of their workplaces, they were willing to leave places of comfort and convenience due to their conviction, to go to the streets, knowing they would face persecution, knowing they would face police dogs, knowing they would face fire hoses, and literally people lost their lives on the streets of Selma, Alabama. But I believe the people there knew that they had a window of opportunity, a narrow window, to effect massive change. And they knew if they didn't act at that decisive moment in time, they would have to answer to their children and to their grandchildren about why they stayed silent, about why they didn't go to the streets. And so they did act. They put their faith into action. And due to their willingness to do exactly what you're doing today, stand on the streets and sidewalks and create a constructive tension in one community, due to that faithfulness, just a short 3 months later, the president who had told Dr. King it was impossible to achieve voting rights for African Americans was on national television calling for the 1965 Civil Rights Voting Act, which just a few months later was signed into law in the U.S. Capitol, not many miles from here. When Dr. King looked back on that era, when he was thinking back and writing about it, he said, "The president told us that nothing could be done, but we started a movement." In the same way, when we look today, here in Falls Church, across the D.C. area, throughout Virginia, across America, we look at the odds that seem to be stacked against the cause of life. We look at the political situation and all the political experts and pundits who are predicting that it's going to be overwhelmingly going against the cause of life. We look at all the power, we look at all the money and the influence of organizations like Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. You look at the media's bias towards the abortion position. You look at all of these things that are stacked against us, and it looks like it's absolutely insurmountable. And the world would tell you and me that ending abortion is impossible. But what the world doesn't know is here today, right on the streets of Falls Church, Virginia, we are starting a movement. And this is a movement of prayer and fasting, a movement of peaceful vigil, and a movement of grassroots educational outreach. And this 40 Days for Life effort began just a short 4 years ago, and I am still in awe as I think back of what God has done in these 4 years. Because 4 years ago, there were 4 people sitting around one beat-up little wooden table in one community in Texas, College Station, and we were frustrated that abortion had come to our community, frustrated that thousands of lives had been lost and women had been wounded, frustrated about the silence in many pulpits about the cause of life, frustrated by the apathy and the indifference that seemed to plague our entire community. And so we decided that what we needed to do is for 1 hour, we needed to fervently pray and ask God to give us guidance rather than try to come up with our own plan. And during that 1 hour of prayer, the first thing that became evident is we needed to do something for a period of 40 days. And the reason that this 40-day time frame is so significant, when you read through biblical history, you see time after time when God wanted to bring about transformation in the lives of His people or in nations or even throughout the world. Many times He did it during a 40-day period. Noah was on the ark for how long? 40 days. Moses was up on Mount Sinai for 40 days. Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days. The apostles had 40 days with our Savior following His resurrection. Time after time, God has used that time frame to bring about transformation.